Yes, Senator, I assure you that as soon as Mr. Tessar is available, he will meet with representatives of your party. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a priority call. Yes, we will try to get back to you today if possible. Goodbye. Good day, Admiral, then. To be honest, I have not expected a call from you, so let me just be blunt and offer my sincere congratulations on your recent victory. And, of course, sorry for keeping you waiting. Unfortunately, our recent actions caused some discontent among certain people in the Council. No worries, Prime Minister. Let me guess, another anti-war manifestation? Surprisingly, no. This time it's the Eco-Believers. Apparently Ms. Giraud and her people took an offense when we sent our Shaper teams to Deus Ex 3. They couldn't really complain during the war since eyes of the entire nation were turned elsewhere, but now they're trying to draw attention to the fact that, according to them at least, we're causing irreversible damage to galactic biodiversity. But it is not something a reasonable discussion cannot handle, so let's not dwell on it. So, how can I help you? First, you can tell me what the Innovation Party is planning to do about General Branitsky and his recent political ambitions. I'm sure I'm not the only one who noticed that this one throne group he found is not exactly in line with Commonwealth's ideals. And, accordingly, it has around 0.2 support amongst our core population. I have to admit that General Branitsky's proclamation was surprising, especially since it was made in such a dangerous moment, but we believe that it may actually be for the best in the long term. Let me remind you, Admiral, that we recently introduced billions of Yadrans into our nation. Said Yadrans are still recovering from recent conquest and extermination, and forcing them to immediately accept our way of life could cause a severe culture shock, which in turn could drive them to do something unreasonable. Let us not forget that while we were, more or less, a democracy for last few hundred years, their society spent last 2.5 millennium stuck in feudalism. It's going to take a long while before they realize that there are more efficient ways of governing, but until that happens, it's good that they will have someone to rally behind. It was the same thing with Lachinov. After their liberation, some Aramathi thought that isolationism is the only way forward, and if not for Nestor's party, they would have no representatives in the council, and that could lead to great many issues, but Lachinov, like a professional he is, stepped in, took the helm, and voiced the concerns of those who were too scared to face the galaxy. Until now, last time I heard, the isolationists were disbanded, since there is less than few thousands of them, as more and more of their numbers walked through their fear. We hope it's going to be the same with General Branitsky. We can only hope so. Thing is, with Aramathi you had propaganda division helping out, but now most of them are in Branitsky's pocket. I admit, what you said sounds reasonable, but the problem is that Branitsky is not Lachinov. Reasonable is not a word I would use to describe him. True, but he is a glory hound, which makes his move predictable. I mean, seriously, what could he do? Crown himself a king and secede? With what? An army he cannot move without your help and population that doesn't exactly enjoy the idea of human leadership? No, he's a pragmatist. He doesn't want to secede, and he doesn't want a revolution, either on Yadrani or on Katanab, since it will make him look weak. No, what he wants, I think, is to get Yadran planets under control as soon as possible, so he could come back home and start lobbying for another liberation. I see. Still, I'm not sure about Branitsky getting more forces, especially since they're mercenaries. Well, the mechs were actually our idea. Right now, mechanized command is hard-pressed on both sides. They have to deal with both Yadran riots and Billy-1 drones. With mercenaries on the scene, our regular forces could focus on policing, while paid soldiers will deal with the rest of the swarms. Dangerous job, sure, but that's what mercenaries are for. Okay then, I see you've thought this through. But now for my main request. Prime Minister, I want to resign from the position of Admiral. I'm sorry, that was unexpected. What caused this decision? Age, I think, and change of priorities. I want to return to my position as an official head of Xenowatch. All these conflicts in recent years made me realize that we need to restore the balance and reassure our people that our strength lies in cooperation between all our races. I see. Very well, I'm not going to stop you, although, well, we hoped that you could lead Manticore into the fray one last time, in Tanaka. Now, I know that sending our fleet to fight so soon— Spare me, Prime Minister, we'll do it. After all, what could be better for proving my point of all species working together than a planet where races from all across the galaxy could live without an issue? Again, that was unexpected. I thought I would have to bribe you with real estate on that paradise world. I'm honored, Prime Minister, but if you want to convince me, you can set that estate aside for the veterans of my fleet. After years in space, the least they deserve is some nice place to retire to, and since they're not as numerous as the army, you probably wouldn't even notice their presence. As for me, if I'll ever want to retire for good, I suppose a ship with large viewport will be enough. Maybe it's just all the years in space talking, but I honestly can't imagine living on the surface again. I mean, sure, down there is where the entire civilization happens, but up here you can feel like you're truly free. You know, like in that old song, "You can't take the sky from me." Believe me, Admiral, I know the sentiment. Hello ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to Second Chance, where we return just in time to witness the triumphant return of Task Force Manticore. The celebration will be short-lived, however, since, as we know, they still have one more job to do, further down the south in Tanaka system. But until our naval yards manage to rebuild at least some ships that we have lost in our fight against the Mind, the crews of Manticore will have a chance to rest, and their downtime will give us an option to take a look at what their victory brought to the Commonwealth. First and foremost, we managed to capture two new planets, Yadrani and Katanab, that both originally belonged to the Kingdom of Yadra, but in recent years were conquered by the ever-hungry Billion swarms. But although it may seem that we've done Yadrans a favor, since technically speaking we saved them all from getting eaten, they're not exactly too happy with the fact that we decided to stick around, instead of returning their worlds back to the Kingdom, especially since Yadrani is their capital and a birthplace of their entire race. And because of that, we're actually facing some unrest issues on Yadrani, where local population started rioting, forcing General Branitsky and his mechanized command to act as a police force to stop Yadran citizens from rebelling. Which is actually a very bad thing, because, as we learned in the last episode, the fact that we've won the war against the Billion Mind doesn't mean that we're done with its drones. In fact, there are still billions of them on both planets, and because of that our forces have to split their attention between civil protection and cleanup operations, which, as you might expect, reduces the efficiency of both tasks. It is a bit better on Katanab though, better as in we're not forced to deal with riots every day. The population on this colony has been almost completely wiped out, and those that remained were so grateful to General Telavin and his troops that they almost immediately fell in line. They're not that happy about our presence, sure, but at least they're grateful for saving their lives. And a good thing that they are, because Katanab is absolutely swarming with feral Billion drones, almost 4 billion of them, so the last thing we need is to waste our troops on police duty. But as for Yadrani, the reports from there were so bad that the Council officially decided to support General Branitsky with additional troops, an army of human mercenaries and a squadron of aerofighters, to provide air support in cleanup operations. And while mercenaries will depart as soon as they're done packing their equipment, the fighter squadron won't be so lucky, because unfortunately this whole situation serves as a warning that sometimes small but very critical details might get lost in the labyrinthine web of interstellar bureaucracy. See, when order to construct this squadron came to Curaçao, nobody questioned it. The forgers set to work and constructed the aircraft, the army found enough aspiring pilots to fill the future squadron's ranks, but nobody asked just how exactly are we planning to get this squadron to operate on another world. For one, the fighters were built on Curaçao, which has different atmospheric composition and gravity than Yadrani. And two, while our Forge world has all the facilities needed to house and field such a squadron, Yadrani doesn't. And before anyone realized that mistake, the unit was nearly ready to be deployed, but the only order they received was to stand down. So, the good thing is that our Forge world of Curaçao now has a very impressive defensive garrison. The bad thing is that we spend a ton of resources and time and money to get Branitsky his reinforcements, only to realize that we cannot send them to him. The mercenaries will have to do, and in the meantime, for the next several weeks, every stand-up comedian in the Commonwealth will have a field day picking this entire situation apart. And since we're talking about Branitsky, let's focus on him a bit. As you may remember, shortly before landing on Yadrani, he proclaimed the formation of an authoritarian monarchist party, officially to gain more influence among the Yadrans. But still, the ideals this party is trying to promote, like dismantling democracy and forming Yadran-like feudal system, is very much not something we want to see in our internal politics. So, in order to keep the situation under control, the Council decided to discreetly suppress this one throne group. Basically, the monarchists will have almost no presence in the mainstream media, and with the help of some specially crafted public campaigns, we're going to discourage people from following them. Which is a bit ironic when you think about it. In order to protect democracy and freedom of speech, we're going to restrict democracy and freedom of speech. Guess only time will tell if that was a good move, but we know for a fact that it worked with Aramathi. As you might have seen there, Lachinov's isolationist party has been dismantled, not by the government, but by the people themselves, since our earlier efforts made Aramathi, who promoted this isolationism, realize that it is not exactly the best way to go forward, and now the party itself is too small to even be considered a statistical error. Now, unfortunately, as soon as Lachinov was done with isolationists, he found himself another bunch of crazies, this time a splinter group of our militarists, the so-called Human Black Party. They don't have much support among our people, but enough to be officially recognized, and their agenda is simple. We have all these fancy space guns, let us use our fancy space guns. Essentially, they are warmongering technocrats, and because Lachinov and his Department of Engineering are actually our main providers of weaponry, it may be that Nestor is actually in it for real this time. We'll have to find him something to do, fast, and fortunately, the Innovation Party has just the idea in mind, but more on that later. Because now it's time for the more optimistic news. Right next to Katanab there is a moon called Badragan 1A, which, like Katanab, is a satellite of a molten world of Badragan 1. Anyway, the second moon is also habitable and covered in cold oceans and mountainous islands, and on those islands our scouts have found yet another alien race, the Vunokon. At first, we thought that these aliens are mere animals, since they don't seem to be organized on even the most primitive level, but closer examination made us realize that these insectoids are actually very similar to our own Kithri from about 40 years ago, which means that they are actually very close to developing actual sentience and intelligence, and just like with Kithri, we may be able to help them out with that. And this may actually be a very profitable decision, because the Vunokon have the potential to become one of the most intelligent species around, not just in the Commonwealth, but in the entire galaxy. The reason is that conditions on this moon caused these aliens to evolve in a very specific way that heavily favored intelligence. In short, these creatures are, for pre-sentience at least, extremely smart, and our researchers quickly noticed that they use some primitive tools and traps, something that, in general, should not be possible at this evolutionary level. And that means that, should we ever decide to uplift them, we can preserve this intelligence. Unfortunately though, there are some downsides. The Vunokon are smart, but they are actually a bit too smart for their own good. See, at some point in history of every species, there is a time when physical capabilities are important to survive, but the Vunokon are so brilliant that they don't have to hone their physical skills, and as a result they are a bit weak. Still, for now we're going to leave them be. Our efforts are focused on different projects, but we will keep those insectoids in mind. One day soon, the Vunokon will stand among citizens of the Commonwealth, and will most probably outsmart us all. But that's still in the future. For now, we have another matters to attend to, namely preparations for our move on Tanaka system. Because of that, our fleet has left the orbit of Arvo and returned to Ortus, in order to finish all the necessary upgrades. Thing is, one of these upgrades will not be applied to the ships, but to their crews. The last war teaches us one thing, that interstellar conflicts are mostly decided in a single decisive battle, where both sides throw all their available forces at each other. Because of that, our freshly trained crews must be prepared for everything. They cannot hope to just hang back and slowly gain experience in minor skirmishes. By the time a ship is ready to deploy, its crew must be trained and ready for all possible opportunities, and to ensure that they are, Commonwealth's Fleet Command decided to open up a special facility, a full-fledged naval academy, on board of Ortus spaceport. The plan is to expand said academy to also have a presence on our major industrial walls of Curaçao and Arvo, but until that happens, Ortus spaceport will once again become our main headquarters. And, as you can see, the spaceport itself changed quite a lot over time. When it was first built, nearly half a century ago, it was a simple structure housing 100,000 people. Now, it's a massive, constantly expanding orbital complex, permanently inhabited by over 2 million of our citizens, and the main seat of our government. Now, that last part actually caused a bit of controversy, since a lot of people began to think that their leaders became detached from the majority of the society, but thankfully, with our computer-based direct democracy, our people can still keep in touch with politicians and monitor their decisions. Strictly speaking, the decision to move the Parliament into orbit was purely pragmatic one. Sure, we may have developed atmospheric shuttles that can travel between low orbit and the surface of the planet, but still launching a vessel into orbit is more energy consuming and expensive than sending it into another planet. Some people considered using wormholes to transport goods and people to and from orbit, but using this tech within gravitational pull of the planet is extremely dangerous, and in fact it is a miracle that we haven't caused irreversible and catastrophic damage to ourselves when we first developed this tech. Now, all this may seem like space travel is only available to the rich, but it is not the case. It may have been at first, but with interstellar travel becoming more important with each passing day, the Innovation Party decided that space is something that each and every one of our citizens should experience, and voted in a law that ensures that the government covers all travel costs for our citizens. It was a very popular move, and it reduced the disparity between rich and poor, but it of course comes at a hefty cost, which means that leaders of the Commonwealth would rather avoid unnecessary orbital flights until they are absolutely needed, and that is why they stay in the orbit. Plus, if hotel reviews on the station are to be believed, the view from the windows is simply breathtaking. However, although our war may be over and we may once again focus on more civil matters of our nation, the rest of the galaxy is not so calm. To the north, battered Federation of Ahadis and rngesus have been completely pushed back by Shizri isolationists, and after several failed attempts at regaining initiative, the Federation finally gave up their plans of conquest. And it is only thanks to that disdain Shizri have for other species that our northern friends haven't lost any of their colonies. The Council could take them. After that defeat against the Mind in Zandeban system, the Federation had no means of stopping them, but instead the Shizri settled on something less threatening, namely deconstruction of two Ahadi frontier outposts, which essentially forced them to abandon all territorial claims in Shizri space, and created a buffer zone between two nations. But that deal doesn't mean the end of struggle for the Federation. They are still at war with the Mind, and although we have seriously weakened it in recent battle, it still is a serious threat, especially since federal fleets have been decimated as well. We'll have to monitor this situation. If the Mind wins, it will reduce or even fully negate the impact of our recent victory. On the other hand, it may give us a cause for yet another liberation, but surely we are not like this. Now, back to our fleet, because as was mentioned, it's high time for it to receive some upgrades. The first equipment to scrap will be our unorthodox psionic engines. They did their job, for a time, but now with more advances in the field of regular propulsion, they simply became outdated and will be replaced with plasma thrusters that offer far more speed and maneuverability. Now, their emissions don't increase the shield output, like in the case of psionic engines, but still it's obvious that when presented with a choice, it's better to not get hit at all rather than hoping that your ship will be able to tank the damage. So, once engines are out of the way, we'll focus on the weapons. For one, we will replace our fission missiles with brand new devices from Lachinov's test labs, antimatter-based rockets. And to put it in perspective, when a single gram of antimatter reacts with regular matter, it explodes with the force of 42 kilotons of TNT, which is twice as much as a Fat Man bomb that was dropped on Nagasaki in Parallel Universe. Let that sink in, and now remember that all our corvettes can fire such missiles. And then remember that our battle cruisers can also fire such missiles, but much larger. Now, of course, it doesn't mean that said warheads are all full of antimatter. After all, it's still extremely expensive to produce and highly unreliable, but even if only 1% of these warheads is actually explosive, we're still looking at city-sized detonations that we can deliver at a rate of 1 per 15 seconds from each vessel. And now, to make it even more terrifying, let's consider that our dear crocodile friends from Yanari League have their entire fleet based on these weapons. Now then, the second gun we're going to use from now on is a plasma accelerator, developed by a group of particle physicists from Dr. Poniewski's division. Basically, this weapon fires blobs of superheated plasma that is so hot that it can basically melt through any armor within seconds of concentrated fire. And for what it does to humans and other organic beings, the less is said the better. If it can melt titanium armor, you may guess what it does to flesh and bone. Now, These plasma accelerators are very similar to our earlier laser weapons in it that they are useful at chewing through armor plating, while being less effective at overloading shields, since they do not have much in a way of kinetic impact. In fact, they are even less useful at dealing with shields than lasers, but make up for it with raw damage, and the already mentioned ability to boil through plates of armor. And, of course, since we developed these weapons for our ships, it also means that our army will receive them, although, as you might expect, built on a much smaller scale. So, to sum it up, we have regular UV laser rifles and coil guns, the standard infantry equipment, and then we get plasma and disruptor cannons for more specialized forces. The antimatter missiles are absent for obvious reasons. Last thing we need is one trigger-happy recruit blowing his entire division to hell. Droids use the same weapons as infantry, mechs are mostly outfitted with coil guns, and our spiders just use spiders. Although, if we could somehow mount plasma cannons on our arachnids, we could get the most terrifying weapon of all times, at least until we develop even deadlier guns. So, while our fleet is awaiting its new deadly toys, our colony at the very edge of the galaxy continues to grow, and in fact it grows at such an overwhelming rate that it soon may run out of habitable space. The reason for that is, once again, our policy of open doors, as this planet is fully settled by immigrants, the original Utkavongo, fifth-gran one-eyed snails, and our current closest allies, the aquatic horse-like Sholani. And, interestingly, it seems that all those races not only came in to become our citizens, they also brought their pets and livestock with them, and that, paired with animals already living on the surface of Sinia, allowed our Bioshock division to open up our first interstellar zoological garden there. An entire island has been turned into a huge complex inhabited by examples of biological life from all across the stars. Not only is this a perfect place for tourists to go, even though the trip from Ortis would take almost 4 months, but it is also a very important research facility. With so many species from so many worlds in one place, we'll be able to conduct some formerly impossible experiments and learn a ton more about biological life in general. And, although no one will admit it, it will also serve as a sort of ark or natural preserve. Sinir is out of the way, so it's unlikely that it will see war anytime soon. And that, paired with our ability to clone living beings, means that this zoological complex is a sort of biological insurance. Should any of those species ever go extinct, we should be able to bring them back to life there. And with so many wars fought with so many devastating weapons, it may be that we'll have to do this sooner rather than later. And speaking of our technological prowess, the Bioshock division has just finished their most important project since the Kithri uplift, the gene tailoring. In short, our scientists are now able to rewrite genetic code of almost any creature, including ourselves, in order to get whatever effect we desire, within reason of course. We could modify genes responsible for, say, muscle density and increase the physical strength of our people. We could modify our pheromone glands to appear more attractive to alien species, and improve our diplomacy as a result. But for now we're going to keep it a bit more pragmatic. For one, we'll begin with modifying our friendly resident microbe, the one that lives inside every human since the Exodus. As we know, this little thing is beneficial as it prolongs our lives, but it is also rather picky when it comes to climate that it lives in, and as a result our people are very poor when it comes to adapting to living on other planets, even similar ones like Curaçao and Redamon. However, with a few chemical injections we can make the microbe more resilient, which in turn will make us more resilient. And, to make things even better, we can also reduce the time this microorganism needs to fully develop within human body, effectively removing the reduced growth rate it caused for over 200 years now. So, in a way, we're not actually modifying humans this time, but we'll still reap the benefits of that project. Sadly, we won't be able to remove the last of our issues, our race-wide agoraphobia. For one, it's not related to the microbe, 2, it is actually more of a psychological thing, and 3, it is also slightly beneficial. Because our ancestors were forced to live underground, we are now naturally adept at mining and construction, to always keep the roof above our heads. Regardless, the public campaign for gene therapies will start immediately, and over the next 3 or 4 years, we hope to improve humanity and make it more suited to interstellar life. Only thing is, some of our people may not be around there to see it.
Supplied.
Because, unfortunately, it's time for us to send Task Force Manticore into yet another battle, hopefully the last one we'll have to face in the coming decades. With all upgrades installed, Admiral Lin took her fleet to Tanaka system in hopes of gaining access to that paradise world there. But it's actually not that simple. For one, this entire operation makes us look like invaders, since we basically spotted a nice piece of real estate and now we're going to wipe out its defenders in order to get it. Only thing is, said defenders are, for all we can tell, long gone by now. Our sensors pick no biological material within their fleet, and no matter what we do, they always greet us with the same automated message that can be summed up as "piss off or we'll shoot ya." So, essentially, this is nothing more than automated defense system, and because of that the Council decided that it is okay for us to eliminate them, especially since they are hostile towards everything that isn't them. Only question is, if the fleet is automated and the planet itself uninhabited, then why is this powerful defense fleet here in the first place? We can't tell for now, but perhaps it has something to do with the fact that all other planets in this system appear to have been shattered some time ago. Some of our Navy science officers claimed that perhaps these planets were cracked open in order to gain material that was used to build this perfect world. Or perhaps the reason is more sinister. We don't know, and for now we have more important matters to attend to. That automated fleet stands between us and the world that is paradise for all forms of life. They have to go. And soon, after a few more failed attempts at diplomacy, Task Force Manticore approached the Gaia world with weapons powered, and the automated defenders moved in to intercept them, beginning yet another battle. And I have to admit that while space combat may be a nerve-wracking and extremely dangerous experience, observing our fleet as it unleashes its full barrage is always an impressive sight. Though the visual aspect has been reduced somewhat by introduction of plasma weapons, since they are not as impressive looking as regular lasers. Plus, of course, all this observation data is useful to our analysts, who will, hopefully, use it to refine our tactics. But regardless, our crews had no time to take in the light show, as the enemy they're facing proved to be extremely dangerous. The automated fleet may be smaller than ours, but they seem to be using weapons that are just as advanced as ours, and, in case of disruptors, even more advanced. Then, it quickly became obvious that these vessels, despite not having actual crews, are still extremely effective. Their programming quickly locked onto our fleet, and after few initial volleys, enemy destroyers began singling out exposed ships and eliminating them with focused fire. And that fire was so concentrated and so accurate that even our newly upgraded corvettes had trouble dodging overwhelming amount of fire coming at them, and soon our formation started to take losses. Sadly though, while our smaller ships were able to evade some attacks, our larger ships had no such luck, and soon one of our support cruisers collapsed under enemy barrage. Fortunately, its modular structure allowed the crew to contain most of the damage, so while the ship was knocked out of action, the majority of the crew managed to get to safety. Out of initial 5,000 engineers, 4,200 managed to get out, and just in time because, as you could have seen there in the distance, once our reactor finally failed, the ship exploded in a blazing fireball. But that explosion was it. Once our dazed engineers cleared the blast zone, they realized that the fighting has stopped, and we were victorious. Once again though, it was not a flawless victory. Aside from that support cruiser, we also lost another 9 corvettes and 3 destroyers, bringing our casualties to around 1,500. Shame, but the end result is a complete annihilation of enemy fleet. So complete that there isn't even a debris field for us to pick through. Turns out that these ships were rigged to self-destruct in the event of being knocked out, and they did just that. One by one, wrecks of enemy destroyers disappeared in explosions that basically removed all traces of them from existence, so we'll never learn their origin. Again, shame, but the prize is far greater. An entire Gaia world within our borders, ready to be settled. But until then, it's time for Admiral Lin and her fleet to return home. They deserve rest, and there is a little surprise waiting for them. Namely, another elections. In a move that surprised everyone, Chancellor Tezar officially declared that he will no longer participate in political life of the Commonwealth, since, after 60 years in power, he decided that it is a high time to pass the torch on to someone else. And that, as you might expect, threw our entire political scene into chaos. For over half a century, Drahoslav Tezar was a symbol of humanity's progress, and now he's gone. For other parties, it was such a surprise that most of them simply couldn't believe it, and as a result their campaigns were a bit anemic. But when the election day finally came, citizens of the Commonwealth, regardless of their race, turned on their datapads and realized that Tezar's name really wasn't on the list of potential candidates. seeing that some people haven't voted at all, but when the day came to a close the results came in anyway. Few moments later, the red government line on board of Admiral Lin's flagship, CSV Osiris, still en route back from Tanaka, sprang to life. Confused, Lin picked up and saw the smiling face of Prime Minister Takumi Ishii. "Congratulations, Miss Lin. I hope you have a speech prepared, because people of the Commonwealth are waiting for the new Chancellor to address them." So, she actually did it. I'll admit this is a bit of a surprise to me. Never thought our people would elect someone from the military. Well, the fact that she just won 2 battles recently certainly helped, especially since that last one gave us access to this paradise world, but it was obvious that she would win, even without giving her supporters those victories to rally behind. After all, Admiral Lin is an official leader of the Xenowatch party, so she had the majority of their votes in her pocket right from the start, and let's face it, her opposition this time wasn't exactly intimidating. Lashinov's new party is a joke, Girod's ecologists were too busy protesting to actually focus on the campaign, and Brunitsky went so far with his propaganda that he basically became a caricature of himself. I think he actually started believing his own monarchist nonsense. Hopefully this defeat will wake him up. And, of course, your own party had practically 0 presence during the entire campaign. Aye, because we don't have time for this nonsense. Academics will still vote for us, and there's little point in trying to convince the rest. But hey, Roman barely showed himself in the media as well, and he still had a nice run. Came in close second, with Lin beating him by just a tiny margin. Same as always, Dr. Poniewski may be a face of industrialists, but the party is basically led by Sinan, and he always makes sure to come in close second. It's convenient for him, I think. By being in the second place, his party still has the power to affect most decisions, but they don't have to deal with all the backlash from the population if something backfires. Every time you mention that banker, I get the feeling you admire him more than it is healthy. But I suppose he's no longer your problem. Still, I think that Roman might actually make a good chancellor. He's calm, collected, and to the point. And although he's not leading the Xenoists, he is very much into aliens. Seriously, have you seen his new Gear assistant? I mean, sure, that mantis is smart as hell, and from what I've heard, no one can match her in the field of particle physics, but after all her recent promotions, people started talking that... Let me stop you right there. I swear it's like your entire department cannot live without constant gossip. Well, there's quite a lot of time to kill when you wait for all the DNA mutations to develop, but okay, you're right. So, Admiral Lin, how do you think she'll do? That depends. She's smarter than she lets on, but she has much to learn. She spent last decades giving orders, so she'll have to learn how to be a bit more diplomatic. Still, if she manages that, I'd say she'll make a good chancellor. Fortunately, she's aware of her own shortcomings and is willing to accept advice from more experienced counselors. And from what I've heard, she already asked Ishii to remain in position as Prime Minister, so he could help her along. And he agreed? Of course, he'll never admit it, but he loves his job. He's a bit like Sinan, has a ton of influence and power, but keeps it away from the spotlight. But, more importantly, he understands the value of balance in politics. So no matter who's in Chancellor's seat, as long as they'll keep old Ishii around, he's going to act like a stabilizing force. So, Admiral is in good hands then. Guess she's going to need it to make sure other political jackals won't use her as a puppet until she learns the ropes. Fortunately for her, we thought around that as well. Once she presents our little secret parting gift to the public, she's going to get enough influence to keep psychophants and opportunists at bay. What secret gift? Wait, does it have something to do with all those field trips Lashinov went on recently? You'll see. I already booked us a passage so we can see it before crowds arrive. And before you start protesting, no, we are not going to spend our entire honeymoon in your lab. It actually took Chancellor Lin a few days to prepare a speech, but before that happened, one thing had to be taken care of. Mere minutes after being officially proclaimed as a Chancellor, Lin has been escorted from the bridge of CSV Osiris, placed on a shuttle that accompanied the fleet, and, with all honors of course, stripped of her rank as an Admiral, since Commonwealth politicians cannot hold a military rank while in the office, which is a measure to prevent various sedition attempts. Regardless, few days later Chancellor Lin officially addressed the people of her nation, and while her speech wasn't exactly perfect, it's clear that she spent a long time as a soldier, it still outlined several very important things. First, Lin proclaimed the official completion of Prosperity branch of the Expanse project, bringing another one of our long-term projects to completion. And, of course, that immediately made her more popular. After all, everyone likes money, so the more we make as a nation, the more our citizens will gain. And then, she also declared a formation of a new development division, which was actually a parting gift from Mr. Tezza, developed in secret over the last few years with various engineers and industrialists from across the Commonwealth. This new department was named Project Starhome, and it used the experience we gained from constructing our various military bases to start building more specialized civilian facilities, namely habitat stations, massive kilometers-wide stations that could house billions of our citizens and effectively act as artificial planets. Even better, said stations could be built in a way that would allow all races to live on them without issues, as every citizen can adjust the local conditions to their own needs. Of course, building such stations would be extremely expensive, but it would allow us to grow and expand without relying on colonizing actual planets. Not only would that let us bypass our poor adaptability, it would also reduce border frictions based on lack of living space. Sure, we may not have too many habitable worlds in our space, but we can always build us some habitats. And finally, our ecologists will be happy, since we now have almost no reason to terraform other worlds. Everyone wins! But that was not the end of surprises. Turns out, the Innovation Party not only planned the Starhome project, they also, thanks to generous donation from Sign-On Financial Solutions, managed to construct a prototype version of a habitat station. Over the last 7 years, the unremarkable system of Bij, close to Asha, has been turned into a massive construction site, where crews of our construction vessels and thousands of civilian contractors slowly build the Bij Solar Station, our very first artificial habitat. And it is, to say the least, a magnificent sight to behold, spanning 19 kilometers from one side to the other and 16 kilometers from top to bottom. This huge self-sufficient station can house up to 6 billion people on its many levels. It may sound like it will be crowded, and it certainly will be a bit cramped, but unlike planets, this station is specifically designed to house people. Not even a centimeter of space is wasted. And here's the best thing. With experience we gained from building this one, we are now able to build stations that will be 2 or even 3 times as large, which is nothing less than a proof of our masterful grasp on stellar engineering. There are even more ambitious projects in store, but for now we simply have no means to construct them. But one thing is sure, this station is just a first step. And because it's a prototype, it will be a bit less focused on actual habitation. Instead, the lower levels of this station, the ones that face the star, have been filled to the brim with solar collectors, reactors and energy capacitors, essentially turning this entire station into a gigantic, super efficient power plant. The downside is that all this sunlight inevitably causes quite a lot of heat, and in order to deal with it we have to use quite a lot of additional energy, which means that conditions aboard this station are not as perfect as they could be. Still, they're better than most worlds we've encountered so far, so it's especially good news for our human citizens. Additionally, our engineers decided to have a little bit of fun when designing this habitat, and on the very top of it they have constructed a zero-gravity sports stadium, which immediately grabbed attention of our tourism companies. So, although the Bij Solar Station may just be a first step, it is a step done with class. Now, we just have to send our people there to settle it, and for the first time in history, humanity will have a true home in the stars. But regular old planetary homes are still in fashion, and as the first year of Lynn's term ended, she travelled to the planet of Deus Ex Prime in order to officially open our colony there. Granted, the ceremony was not as flashy as opening of the solar station, but it was still impressive enough when looked at in context. 15 years ago, the place where the ceremony took place, the capital city of Deus Ex Prime called Hawking's Landing, was at the bottom of a warm ocean. The mountains that surrounded the capital and protected it from cold winds were islands, overgrown with mangrove jungles. There were pictures and vids that showed how this planet looked before, and when the guests and settlers looked at them, they couldn't believe that this is the same world. The entire ceremony was basically a single huge shout-out to our Shaper teams, people who spent almost a decade to make this world suit our needs. There was of course a protest of ecologists just on the other side of the city, but it was almost empty. It seems that even Giraud's eco-believers are impressed with our efforts, even though they'll never openly admit it. Soon though, we had another bit of colonization to deal with. this time on that miraculous Gaia world that our people started calling Zanam, same as it was called by its automated defenders. And when our first settlers came onto the surface, they simply couldn't believe their eyes. The place was perfect in all possible aspects. The weather was both pleasant and useful, as mild rains watered local flora and manageable winds allowed us to develop wind farms. The biosphere seemed like it was tailored to be put on a postcard. No predators, no venomous vermin, and no stinking plants. Only myriad of colorful small creatures and plants that seemed to exist in perfect balance, until we landed a huge city-sized ship on top of their heads, that is. But the most important discovery was made on one of the southern continents. See, this entire planet seems like it was never inhabited, but far in the south, our explorers found a single structure, an obelisk of some sort, clearly made by an intelligent race. At first, its purpose was unknown, but then we realized that it is actually the source of that constant, annoying screeching sound that can be heard across the entire Tanaka system. Annoying as it is, though, this sound doesn't seem to affect us in any way. Sure, it can cause some headaches, but after listening to it for several minutes, it's rather obvious. Surprisingly, though, the sound is only audible in space for some reason, so it doesn't annoy our settlers. We have no idea why it works like this, but it's something we're planning to find out, because, as it turns out, this obelisk is actually a huge data vault. It is extremely well encrypted, and uncovering its secrets will probably take years, but from the few scraps we managed to uncover so far, our researchers were able to tell one thing. This place, this entire planet and the obelisk itself, is going to occupy our researchers for generations to come. Who knows, maybe one day we'll learn the history of this world and the obelisk itself, since it's a bit odd that it just stands there on its own. Perhaps we'll learn something about that fleet that was in the orbit, or perhaps we'll figure out how to deal with that annoying sound. That would surely be for the best. So, the beginning of Chancellor Lin's term is proving to be a very good time for the Commonwealth. On Yadrani and Katanab, our forces were finally able to eliminate the last of Billy One Walker drones, and although they still need to remain on this planet to prevent civil unrest, more and more Yadrans of both races are slowly coming around to accept life in the Commonwealth with each passing day. With our wars out of the way, with our colonies steadily growing, and with our industries once again focused on civilian production, we were able to return to the way of life from before our conflict with the Zrakan Union. In her second year in the office, Lin once again reinstated the policy of academic privilege, and soon Commonwealth's researchers of all races began working with increased fervor, ever striving to uncover the secrets of the galaxy. And in the north, our friends from Ahadi-Jir Federation managed to regroup after the lost war against isolationists, and together they pushed Billy One Mind back, forcing the ravenous hive mind to abandon 3 of its colonies. The mind is still not broken, but between us and the Federation, it has been severely weakened. All the galaxy can feel a little safer now. But it was one of those freshly promoted scientists who brought us the most important news of the year. One of our listening posts, located on the northern border of our empire, picked up a signal, but not a regular faster-than light signal, no, the old-fashioned light-based transmission that must have traveled for decades to reach us. And the message itself proved to be something, well, very close to home, for it was a welcoming call, sent by a civilization that, apparently, have not yet mastered interstellar travel. In said message, an insectoid alien calling itself Vukazor of the Vein to Extrasolar Intelligence Institute called to anyone who might listen to come along and visit his people. In short, it was a message of hope, similar to ones our ancestors have long ago sent from Earth, and although we couldn't tell what exact intentions these insectoids might have, the tone of their message was clearly not hostile. Soon, our researchers were able to trace the signal to its origin point, which was surprisingly within our borders, and the decision was made in an instant. We are going to send an expedition to meet those hopeful aliens, and if they're truly as eager to join the galactic community as they seem, then we're going to help them do just that. So, the Science Council gathered once again, and the decision was made to send our most experienced explorer, Commander Shen Kuo, and his ship, CSV Tesla, to investigate, and act as our ambassadors. And after a decade of acting as a support to Science Council without any long-term missions, Commander Kuo agreed instantly. Soon, the team was assembled. The majority of Kuo's old team itched for action. Even Engineer Reiter, who was in charge of the Phalanx Protocol, showed up to take part in this mission. And to make it even more symbolic, the Science Council ordered to retrofit old CSV Tesla to the newest model, a science cruiser that was nearly 4 times as large as the original ship. After all, if we're going to meet new civilizations, it would be best to make an impression. And so, once the preparations were done, CSV Tesla Mark II departed from the orbit of Redamon Prime, with Commander Kuo and nearly 500 personnel on board. Their mission? To go to Valin Prime and establish contact with that race of hopeful insectoids. To boldly go where someone is waiting for us. When humans first began exploring and colonizing solar systems outside of their own, they quickly found out just how many logistical problems such endeavors created. One of the most mundane, and yet still one of the most important, was food supply. Back on Ortus, this wasn't a problem. Aside from the food crisis that happened in first 2 decades after the Exodus, humanity's new homeworld turned out to be surprisingly well suited to mass-scale agriculture, despite its bleakness. Crops from Earth were grown en masse in hydroponic farms that mirrored climate of the blue planet. In the windswept valleys roamed herds of hairy large mammals, named uncreatively frost buffaloes by first colonists. Slow and docile, these migrating herbivores proved to be an accessible source of food, and they were hunted at first and then domesticated within first 2 years of human presence on the planet. But the most important food source turned out to be a small, unassuming fungus that covered almost every flat surface inside Ortus' many caves. Healthy and nutritious, this fungus nonetheless needed some chemical preparation in order to be consumed, and during first decade on the planet, many exiles learned, to their unending embarrassment, the side effects of unprepared fungus. Some chemicals contained within it reacted with human brain, causing afflicted person to talk constantly about everything they could think of for about an hour. Additionally, said chemicals also stimulated prefrontal cortex, part of the brain responsible for lying, which meant that those hour-long tirades were mostly outlandish, larger-than-life stories about fighting dragons or romantic encounters with famous celebrities, hence the name the exiles gave to this fungus, storyteller. Fortunately, simple preparation with acetic acid, pickling basically, was enough to remove this side effect, while also preserving all nutritious value. Unfortunately, while those foodstuffs were easy to obtain on Ortus, organizing provisions for interstellar settlers and explorers turned out to be far more difficult. Crops from Earth were already weak compared to their local counterparts and, aside from undying potato, almost impossible to cultivate on board of spaceships and stations. The storyteller needed its dark, drafty caves to grow properly, and those 2 conditions were almost impossible to replicate in space. And as for the frost buffalo, breathing them away from the planet was obviously out of the question, which meant that transporting them to far-flung colonies was extremely profitable. And yet, only a handful of merchant captains ever accepted such contracts, and none of them done so more than once. According to Commonwealth's travel logs, after delivering a shipment of frost buffaloes to the planet Redamon Prime, Captain of CSV Goldfish took his payment without a word, then flew dangerously close to local star and vented the ship, claiming that he preferred to deal with solar radiation than with the smell. All those issues meant that stellar travelers from the Commonwealth had to rely on the pre-packaged food made on Ortus, which led to several complications. First, it greatly reduced range of all missions, as ships were forced to return home to restock on supplies. Second, it meant that all space outposts and early colonies had to be constantly resupplied, which led to increased consumption of fuel and other resources required for constant logistical runs. And third, it slowed down growth of new colonies, as fresh pioneers knew that, until they established self-sufficient agriculture, they were reliant on supplies from home. All that changed, however, when a group of agriculturalists from the Fedgran Union introduced storm slugs to human farmers. These storm slugs, named so because of their ability to generate small electric discharges in order to deter predators, were common sight on Fedgran homeworld. In fact, something that Union scientists admitted with considerable reluctance, the slugs and Fedgrans shared a common ancestor far down the evolutionary line. For the locals on Vedran, these slugs were worthless, but after several tests, joint human Fedgran science team realized that these creatures had inside them everything human body needed to function. And the most important part, storm slugs were able to adapt to almost every condition. They could survive in hot and cold climates, in wet jungles or arid tundras, and most importantly, aboard spaceships. Thermosynthetic by nature, all they needed to thrive was a few heat lamps and some water. In return, a single storm slug was enough to feed an adult colonist for a whole day. Today, storm slugs are a common sight on every human-controlled world or station, and although they are something humanity desperately needs in order to secure galactic-wide food supply, storm slugs remain one of the most hated dishes served across the stars. Not because of their taste, which is actually described as decent or similar to chicken, but because of deeper psychological reason. Humans tend to have reservations about eating food that looks at them from the plate. Unfortunately, storm slugs have between 16 to 20 eyeballs scattered around their bodies. As described by travelers across the stars, it's like eating concentrated guilt for breakfast.